Hello everybody, I'm pretty sure we've all got that one car that's sat out there in the classifieds talking to us, begging us to buy it, no matter how much conventional wisdom tells you it's a terrible idea. Perhaps the most prominent example of this is the Lamborghini Countach, the ultimate bedroom wall poster car that the internet will tell you is utterly terrible to drive. However, if you were offered the keys to one, you would, wouldn't you? To be honest, the Countach is not actually a car I ever really lusted after all that much. For me, that was the job of the Diablo. You can blame Need for Speed. However, it's always a car that's had my attention, if for no other reason than it was imprinted on my mind the moment I saw Jeremy Clarkson demonstrate the classic Countach reversing technique, hanging out the side of it. And I thought then, wow, if you're willing to put up with having to do stuff like that, it must be rather special. Not that the Countach ever had an easy time of things, because this was the replacement for the achingly pretty Miura. Not just one of the most beautiful cars of the 1960s, it's one of the most beautiful pieces of art, full stop. I'm pretty sure Jaguar's engineers behind the XJS also had a similar issue. How do you replace the E-Type? The answer is, you don't try and beat it, you go another path. And with this, what we got was the ultimate in 70s wedge. It's a statement, whether you like it or not. Today, it is the earliest examples of the Countach which are the most desirable and therefore the most valuable, the LP400, otherwise known as the Periscopio, due to a system they were designed to get but never actually received in production form. There is, however, still a remnant of it. The idea was that because rear visibility, even in the early days, was a problem for the Countach, rather than have your traditional rearview mirror, you instead had a periscope system for the driver. A little bit needlessly complicated, however, they decided at the last minute it wasn't necessary, but the cutout for it remained in those early cars. Those are the ones you can identify because they have nearly none of the extra arts extensions and things that the later cars got. They look very much concept car because they are almost exactly the same as the concept car Marcello Gandini penned only a few years earlier. Come 1978, and the LP400 had already been in production for 4 years and was upgraded and turned into the LP400S, which introduced one of the car's most iconic features, the rear tyres. The early cars had only 215 sections at the back, which for a car with nearly 400 horsepower wasn't very wide, even back then. This got the widest tyres of any production car of the time. Even today, they are enormous, 345/35/15s. They are incredible. They also necessitated the introduction of these wheel arches that stayed with the car for the rest of its life. Happily, though they are, as you might imagine, expensive, you can buy them. Today, the Countach is often seen as an all-mouth and no-trousers car, but the fact is, it was actually quite advanced for its time. The chassis is a tubular steel space frame, Formula One technology in the 1970s. The suspension is largely rose-jointed, and it was the first production car ever to get scissor doors, a feature that you can still find on today's Lamborghini V12s. This being Italian, we of course have to talk about that engine. Enzo Ferrari famously resisted the idea of putting the engine behind the driver in his road cars for many years, deeming it fit only for experienced racing drivers. However, once Lamborghini did it with the Miura, he had no choice but to follow suit. Curiously, both companies took a very different approach as to how to package the engine. Lamborghini with the Miura installed their V12 transversely and created this incredible setup which featured the engine, gearbox and transaxle essentially all in one. Ferrari decided to install a flat 12, much as they were using in their Formula 1 cars of the day, and that went longitudinally behind the driver but sat atop the gearbox, something of a compromise for the car's dynamics. For the Countach, Lamborghini advanced things even further. They turned the engine around and installed the gearbox ahead of it. That is where the LP designation comes from, longitudinal posteriore. Engine pointed that way, at the back. From an engineering perspective, you'd call this genius, because it's a great way of packaging a fairly hefty engine and gearbox into a relatively compact car. By having the gearbox up front, you also don't have to worry about rods or linkages or anything like that, giving you a substandard shift. In fact, this layout is still in use in the Aventador. Unfortunately, the drawback, as you might imagine it, is with maintenance, because certain jobs require the engine to come out, as they do on the Diablo and even the Murcielago. And you may imagine that is not easy and therefore not cheap. This all-alloy V12 actually had an incredibly long life, starting service in some of Lamborghini's very first cars and finally seeing out its days in the back of the Murcielago. Over the following years, the car saw a number of upgrades. In 1982, the LP400S turned into the LP500S and capacity went from 4 to 4.8 litres. In 1985, we got this, the LP5000 Quattro Valvoli, 4-valve per cylinder, and capacity grew once again from 4.8 to 5.2 litres, and the carburetors moved from the side to the top of the engine, where you will find no fewer than 6 of them, and they are the reason for the very distinct hump in the engine lid. Power is 455 PS and torque 369 pound-foot, which is 500 Newton meters. In 1988, the final chapter of the Countach story landed with the 25th anniversary, styled by one Horacio Pagani. And even today, that's a car considered very divisive, with some celebrating it as the ultimate in Lamborghini excess, and others deriding it as the car furthest away from the pure lines of the original LP400. For most cars, especially ones with a product life as long as this, as the car gets older, sales continue to decline. But with the Countach, the opposite is actually true, with more than half of them ever made being from the last 5 years of production. There are 2 reasons for this, really. Firstly, the company had new owners who wanted more sales. Secondly, the QV was actually the first Countach available legally in America. Before this, if you wanted one, you had to go the grey market route. US market Countach are very easy to spot because they have this very ugly front bumper here, and at the back, the carburetors are replaced with fuel injection. As time has passed and the legend of the Countach has grown, the prices have risen too. Once upon a time, you could pick one of these up for the same money as a half-decent 911. But now, I've had to insure this gorgeous Acapulco blue right-hand drive example, brought to me by a very lovely man called Jay, for £500,000. The interior is rather straightforward, and to be honest, there isn't much of it. This car has a couple of interesting features. First, the blue dashboard. Secondly, the uprated stereo, of which it actually has 2, and it was like this from the day it was new. You have the regular, rather nasty looking Alpine cassette on the right, and to the left, an Alpine CD player with a graphic equalizer. Ooh! Generally speaking though, this is classic old school Italian, so lots of lovely nice leather, rather nasty cheap switchgear, and visibility only in one direction, that way. Time then to find out just how good a Countach really is to drive. Wish me luck. I can only imagine what the good people of this sleepy little part of England are thinking as they're seeing this incredible thing carving down the roads. I may have been a touch harsh on it earlier when I talked about the visibility, because actually not only can you see that way, you can also see that way as well. Over there and behind you, forget about it. I know there's some road behind me, but not much more than that. Getting into the car is not actually that difficult, particularly for an ex-Lotus owner. However, there's not a lot of headroom. I am 5'10", but long in torso, and it's a snug fit, this car. That being said, I am fairly quickly getting used to it. I'm gonna warm it through properly. It's been sat for a few hours while I've done my introduction. but once it is up to temperature, I will certainly be giving it the beans. Peak power is delivered at 7,000 RPM, but I have to say it's actually rather tractable even from fairly low down. The car weighs pretty much bang on 1,500 kilos, so not a flyweight and actually reasonably heavy by the standards of the day, but with 450 horses behind it, I'm pretty confident it'll move when asked. The wing mirror over there is showing me absolutely nothing useful. I can see the left air intake and that's about it. This one is doing a slightly better job, but honestly, the car's not actually that big. You can place it fairly easily despite not being able to see any of the front because you feel like you're essentially on the road. There's almost nothing, it seems, between you and the tarmac. Quite glorious. It is very loud in here and a lot firmer than I expected too. I suppose I should have known that was going to be the case because it is rose jointed, but most cars I've driven from the 70s, and okay, this is a 1986 car, but let's be honest here, it's a Countach, it's from the 70s, they're kind of wobbly. The Alfa Romeo Montreal, for example, incredible engine, but handling like an old Capri. This doesn't seem to be that way at all. The gearbox is a 5-speed manual with a dog leg first, so left and down. To keep you from going into reverse by accident, there is a physical lever to lock it out, but remember to put it back when you're done. There's a young lad in a silver Golf behind who I'm sure currently is feeling like an absolute hero, not knowing that the man in front of him is absolutely petrified. At lower RPM, she seems to bog down just a little, but as the revs increase, the engine gets happier and happier. Let's stretch the legs just a little bit. Oh, wow. Oh, oh yes. Ah! I'm driving a Countach. And cover the children's ears. Cover them now. I'm driving a Countach and it's not shit. The steering is beautiful, unassisted, at low speeds a little on the heavy side, but really not that much of an issue. The steering wheel is miniature, wriggles in your hand, the whole thing feels alive. You really are part of it. You get the sensation that the engine is merely inches from your head, because it is. The throttle pedal is actually quite long, the clutch impossibly so. The seat didn't really want to lock itself into position earlier, so I'm not where I'd like to be. I can't actually get the clutch pedal all the way down, but that doesn't seem to be a problem. Weirdly, even the Gallardo is exactly like that. A Lamborghini thing, evidently. It's bogging down a little bit there. It could be me, it's sort of part throttle, it doesn't seem all that happy. I don't know whether that's right or wrong. I'm just going to describe it as it comes to me. Let's get a downshift, shall we? Wow, lovely. The clutch, I don't actually have really that much of a problem with it. Beyond the aforementioned long travel, it's not as impossibly heavy as I've been led to believe. The gear shift, however, is. It's not impossible to operate, but does require some effort. Car's cracking and popping. Fuel economy, I've absolutely no idea, but let's assume terrible, shall we? And let's also be honest, if you've just spent £500,000 on a Countach, are you really going to care, even at these fuel prices? Actually, some people might, but for the most part, don't worry about it. It's a flipping Countach. Public approval factor through the roof. I have to say, the Ferrari 330 GT I drove the other day was much better mannered at low RPM. It is quite warm in here. I'm going to have to open the window because the AC is pretty ineffective. In all fairness, so is the window. That's pretty much my lot. I have also been told to be very, very careful because these are known to break when you shut the door and they're almost impossible to replace. Young lad in the Golf very much approves. I would love to have been able to return his thumbs up out the window, but that's about all I can do. Sensory overload. That's the Countach in 2 words. I'm really quite impressed at the body control. The car feels quite planted, quite intuitive. You know, I had this big piece prepared about how the Countach was great to look at, but yeah, a bit naff to drive, but it didn't matter because it sounded fantastic. And where at Lotus Europa would run rings around it, this is the ultimate bedroom wall poster car, so it doesn't matter that it's terrible to drive. However, it feels like it might actually put in a half-decent performance in the bends. The sun is even trying to make an appearance for me, and I haven't done my drive-by shots with this yet. I'm actually really looking forward to those. I'm hoping it will deliver some gorgeous footage for you all. At this point in time, I should remind you, if you're enjoying the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon too. If you are already subscribed, let me say a big thanks to you, because you have helped get me here. So, we're in a Lamborghini Countach on one of my favourite roads. Shall we give it the beans? Oh yeah. There's a very odd noise, almost like a jet engine coming through the car now. Not quite sure exactly what that is, or whether it's meant to do it. You can still make pretty decent progress in this car, or more accurately, it feels like you can, which, let's be honest here, is all that matters. The speedo and the mile counter are in kms, which is normal for a Countach. I think they're all like that, regardless of where they were delivered. This one is currently sat on 56,000. That's not a lot for a car that's about 36. Yeah, low RPM it bogs down. You got to push through it with the throttle pedal, and then it picks up. Everything I know about riding motorbikes with carburetors on is kind of coming back to me. They're funny things. You put your foot down, they feel wrong, so your natural instinct is to kind of back off, but no, you got to put your foot down further, harder. The car wants you to. Just listen to it. More fuel, more throttle, more speed, more, all the time. How are the brakes? Worth checking. Actually, not entirely rubbish. Not quite as good as I maybe hoped, but also not as dreadful as I'd feared. You know, I expected a lot of things tonight, but I didn't expect that I'd have the confidence to drive the car like this and not feel totally terrified. I'm not really worried for the value of it. That's why I have insurance, and to be honest, you can't think about things like that when you're driving stuff like this, because otherwise you'd never do it. Instead, the concern is really for what will happen to you if you happen to have an off. But I feel confident in the car. The tyres are relatively decent and fresh. They've got grip. And first, okay, three-point turn in a Countach. This is not going to be its strong suit. Oh, no, actually it's not horrendous. Not horrendous. Okay, yeah, loads of space, we're good. Oh. Woo. One of the few issues I have, heel and toe just isn't as easy as I would like. I can rev match just about, but the pedal setup is not intuitive, not easy. You're also permanently conscious, particularly with this subtle blue colour, of just how invisible you may be to other road users. There's a solution for that. Pop-up headlights. They're probably rubbish, but they're on now. It's 8 o'clock at night. The church bells are ringing, but I've brought my own music. A chorus called Bizzarini V12. It's very warm in here, I have to say that. I suppose it would be remiss of me to drive this car and not mention the other iconic 1980s bedroom wall poster, the Testarossa, which I am also lucky enough to have driven. The two are actually, in terms of the drive, remarkably similar. Fairly heavy gearboxes, the Ferrari was much better mannered, the engine was much more tractable, much more agreeable at all RPMs. In terms of outright speed, they felt similar. The Ferrari, certainly the slightly softer car, this feels more racy in its suspension setup. And weirdly, though the Ferrari was certainly larger inside, it didn't feel like it actually had that much more room. I think it would be much easier to daily a Testarossa now. The Countach would be much trickier. You'd have to be pretty seriously committed. But the Testarossa, you could just about manage it. We appear to have used quite a bit of fuel in this review. The dogleg layout means that you're often actually one gear lower than you think. So what you imagine third is as actually second, so on and so forth. But the fact is, this feels like it's quite long geared, so in practice, it actually works quite well. More beans. This thing has to be respected. You get it to about 4,000 RPM and it pulls in a way that will impress even a modern car fan. They say 455 horsepower, I believe them. How can I describe a Lamborghini Countach? How can I summarize something like this? It's loud, it's brash, it's in your face, but I think there is one way that I can do it. I said earlier that I never really lusted after a Countach. It was never my thing. But the more I look at them, the more I like the shape. And now I've driven it, I kind of want one. No, I really want one. That is the mark of a genuinely great car. As you might expect, running and maintaining one of these is not cheap or easy. If you happen to find an example that's been in storage for some considerable time, bank on a 5-figure bill simply to bring it back to life. Many parts are either very expensive or simply impossible to find, and Lamborghini do not support their older cars in anywhere near the way that Ferrari do. If you are actually in the fortunate position to be able to buy one of these cars and you're wondering what to look out for, my advice really would be find one that has been used and driven on a regular basis, because at least that way you'll know it's more likely to be a good one. I haven't actually even got into 5th yet. Let's do that. We're in 5th now. And she can still pull reasonably well. What a machine. What an incredible, stunning machine. The suspension is considerably firmer than I'd expected, but the payoff is that body control, that confidence to throw it around a bend. The Europa I was talking about earlier is a much more delicate thing, fingertip light to drive. This is a wrestling match, but you knew that already, didn't you? That's what you've signed up for. Forza Lamborghini. And from me, thanks to you all for watching. Thanks for your support over the years. A huge thank you to Jay for bringing his car out. Don't forget to hit that like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.